Okay, well, welcome everyone to our webinar. This is our kind of like first one of the application year. Orientation to application is all about how to succeed, right? So we're not going into super details of each step of the process because we'll have different webinars for that, but we wanted to give like an overview of what you should be doing when at each stage of the process so that you can be successful and know that you're on track. So my name is Michaela. I am the founder and co-owner of GC Prep. We also have a couple of our coaches on here as well. Janelle Villiers is my co-owner. She's going to be manning the chat. So if you have any questions during the webinar that you just want a quick answer to, feel free to stick them into the chat and she will answer those in real time. If they are ones that she thinks are relevant for everyone, then we'll kind of save those to the end and we'll do also a Q&A then if you want to ask your questions to the group. Okay. We also have Jessica Shiles. She's one of our coaches as well. So we're going to talk about all of that and how to get you guys from point A to B, B being into grad school. Okay. And Janelle, just to verify, you guys can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we just advanced, correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, here we go. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about just briefly what is GC Prep as an entity. And we're doing that so that you guys know why we're qualified to talk to you about this stuff, right? Then we'll talk about what makes a successful applicant. We'll go over some match stats for the last year or so, and then what your goals should be, and then take a look at your application timeline. So each step of the way, what are you doing? What are you looking into? What's going on in your life right then? And then finally, we'll look at services through GC Prep that are available to help you. And even if you don't do these things through GC Prep, like let's say you have a genetic counselor that you know that you're working with or shadowing and they're helping you, ask for these things, right? Because it doesn't really matter where you get that help, but the spoiler, like the point of this webinar is you should get help doing this, right? To be more successful. So let's get started. What is GC Prep? So we are a for-profit organization. Okay, that's my disclosure. And we're essentially a group of practicing genetic counselors, and we have a couple of aims. One, we want to help prospective students have a clear and successful path through the application process. A lot of the times, it's clear what you need to do, like what the schools are asking for factually, but how to do those well can be pretty obscure, right? Especially when the prompts are so vague, there's a lot of different ways to write to them. And so it can be difficult to know that you're doing it successfully, right? So we wanted to demystify that, make that clear so that the people who are going to be excellent genetic counselors can show that they're going to be excellent counselors and end up as a counselor, okay? We also want to help address some of the inequities and diversity disparities in the field. And so underrepresented applicants like racial minorities, LGBTQIA+, and people from a low socioeconomic background can actually access all our educational videos for free by filling out our demographic survey and getting that. We hope to one day expand that to getting free one-on-one coaching. We're not quite there yet, right? But we are working on developing either a 401c, I guess it's a 501c charitable arm or other methods so that we can do that in a nonprofit way. And then of course, long-term, we want to also support people who are in school as students with their job hunting, with boards prep, and then when they graduate and transition into their career, we want to make sure to support them all along the way. Okay? So who is working here, right? There's me. I've been a genetic counselor for about 10 years, experiencing clinical prenatal and then kind of in industry and then lab genetic counseling and a lot of teaching. Okay? Janelle, as I mentioned, she's my co-owner. She also has done clinical prenatal and lab counseling, and she was an assistant program director at Sarah Lawrence for a long time. And now she's, and of course, an entrepreneur in many different ways as well. And she does our premium coaching services. Janice is the program director at BayPath. university, and she offers services, of course, has like vast knowledge and experience picking applicants to accept into her program. So she knows what these program directors are looking for. And she does coaching as well, but you can't apply to Bay Path if you're going to use Janet. Right? That's a conflict of interest. We have Jessica and Jessa, who are both experienced in lab and also in the nonprofit space and have life coaching certifications as well as their genetic counseling degree. And Anna is, again, experiencing clinical and lab counseling and transitioned from being a professional ballet dancer to genetic counseling. So that's kind of a brief snapshot of who we are, but we're all counselors and we all kind of gathered here because we care what your experience is in this process. And we want people who are really passionate about the field of genetic counseling and have the skills to be excellent counselors to make it into the field for the betterment of the field and for the betterment of patient care, really. So that's why we're here. Okay. Altogether, I figured out today, we bring about 60 years of genetic counseling experience to this kind of like coaching table. Okay. So let's talk about what kind of applicants are successful, right? So the ideal applicant would have a balance of passion and emotional intelligence and academic excellence, right? So all three of those things together are really the ideal candidate that programs are looking for, but realistically, almost no one fits that, right? And that's okay, right? You don't have to fit that exactly to be successful. This is also fine, right? Where the passion is still all there. And maybe your academics are not as strong as you were hoping, but your emotional intelligence is significantly higher, okay? And that emotional intelligence and your ability to be insightful about your experiences and what you have learned and how it impacted you and how it impacted the other people involved. That emotional intelligence can actually make up for some other shortcomings, especially in academics. So it's our job as coaches to help you leverage your strengths and improve any weaknesses you might have to be the complete package for grad school. Let's talk about each of these sectors for a minute, okay? Just so you guys know, like where can I be lacking and where do I fill it, right? So that we have a complete picture here. Okay, so first let's talk about academics. Grad school's hard, like really hard, okay? These are very challenging classes. They move at a faster pace than they did in undergrad. There's a lot more information and a lot more detailed information. And at the end of the day, your understanding of that information is what patients will be making decisions on, like how they're going to treat their cancer or if they're going to terminate their pregnancy or not, right? So these are very high stakes decisions that people are making on the information that you provide them and how well you explain the information. So you're not making the choice for them, but it is absolutely essential that people who become genetic counselors have the intellectual capabilities to really understand this complex information and then explain it in bite-sized pieces, okay? So what that means for your GPA depends on you individually. There are some people who started college, they were not in the right space for them and they kind of had poor grades to begin with, and then they kind of found the genetic space and biology and realized, yes, I'm super passionate about that. And then in their prerequisites, their grades were significantly improved, right? And so a program would look at that and be like, you know what, the overall GPA is lower than we expect, but for all the classes that matter, we can see achievement, right? There are people who have just kind of lower GPAs overall, even in the science classes. And that is probably going to be a little bit more of a struggle for you, okay? If you have lower than a B in any of those prerequisite classes, you may want to consider retaking them. If they were a long time ago or like years ago, then taking other courses or other advanced kind of like genetics practicums and classes, even online, and scoring well in those can be proof right, to programs that, yes, I am intellectually capable of comprehending this very challenging genetic material. Even though my GPA might not suggest it, here's my proof, okay? So if you're coming with a lower GPA, again, that can be totally fine. We can cover it with some emotional intelligence, but to a point, right? We need to be able to prove to the schools that you have the ability to pass your classes in grad school, okay? The emotional intelligence piece, right? So the difference between a genetic counselor and other people working in the field of genetics is not their understanding of the genetic mechanisms, it's how well they communicate, right? So if you, in general, hate talking with other people, genetic counseling is not for you, right? You don't have to be extroverted. There are plenty of introvert genetic counselors. That's totally fine. But you do need to be able to have a conversation with a stranger. You do need to be at least somewhat aware of their social cues, okay? Schools are looking at you as a person. They're not only looking at your achievements on paper and your GPA when they're deciding if they're interested in you or not. They want to see your personality. They want to understand, like, is this person who has achieved highly and done all the things that we've asked them to do, are they able to have a conversation with someone else, right? And develop some rapport in that conversation. If your ideal job is being left alone to work and have limited contact with your coworkers, then this is not the field for you, right? And that's okay. Yeah, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just to set expectations. There's a lot of talking with other people in genetic counseling, even if you're not seeing patients, right? Like, I don't see patients right now, but I have to talk to my coworkers and lab directors and providers all the time, right? And communicate that information to them. So we just want to make sure that you have those kind of communication skills and some degree of people skills to be able to do those interactions. And finally, passion. This is essential. Okay? We have to be able to see the passion and almost feral, like push your glasses up, kind of like, I'm so excited about this, run out of breath talking about it type of passion. You don't necessarily have to show all those things, but we want to be able to see it in your eyes that you're a little bit cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs about genetics, okay? As a field of study, and also the potential for helping other humans through their genetic process, right? However it's affecting their lives, that is what we need to see the passion about. So if someone feels kind of like neutral, or there's just kind of a general lack of enthusiasm, or if they're approaching genetic counseling as like, oh, it seems like a good fit career for me, is probably not going to cut it when compared with other applicants who might have the same qualifications and GPA, but are like super enthusiastic. Okay? The other thing to think about with this passion is an honest review of what's going on in the job market right now. And to be brief, it's shit, unfortunately. So 2 years ago, and for all the time of genetic counseling before that, there were always more jobs than there were counselors. There was such a demand for genetic counselors, and we couldn't train people fast enough. And in the last couple of years, a couple of the big laboratories have kind of collapsed and laid off a bunch of genetic counselors, and it is rough out there to get a job. And our new grads are feeling that. We don't know where we're going to be in 3 years. Like, if you guys apply and match and then graduate, that will be 3 years from now. It could be just like this. It could be much better, right? We're in this kind of post-COVID state. Job hunting is terrible for everybody, not just genetic counseling. But there are a couple of like legal processes that are not working in our favor right now. Like, we really need Medicaid to start covering genetic counseling to be able to get people to pay for it, essentially. So those who are passionate about genetic counseling and know for sure this is the field for them might not love that news, right? but it's not necessarily going to deter them from applying, right? People who are more, yeah, it seems like it would be a good thing, a good field for me. It's kind of iffy right now, you know? Take that into consideration when you're deciding whether to apply. And I share this not because I don't want you guys to become genetic counselors. I absolutely do if that is your passion, right? I also want you guys to be able to pay your bills. And the genuine, honest, frank answer is we don't know what's happening, right? And we don't know if it'll get better, when it'll get better. We anticipate the job market will improve because the amount of genetic tests is still increasing. We still very much need genetic counselors. It's just a matter of employers catching up to that and being willing to pay for a genetic counselor on their staff. Okay. Happy to answer more questions about that if we can at the end, if there are any. So let's talk about some match stats, right? And your goals. So your overall goal that we have for you, right, is we want you to be confident at application, confident during interviews, and then confident while you're waiting for a match day. And that source of confidence is appropriate preparation, right? And knowing what you're doing. And it's hard to know what you're doing if you're trying to figure it out all by yourself because the programs don't provide enough specific guidance for people to really know how to do that well. Okay? Also, if you're a reapplicant, please reject any negative self-talk that's going on in your brain. Being a reapplicant is not a deterrent at all. It's not a detriment to you as you go into applying again. Okay? So we just want to be able to show how you've grown and how you've improved and strengthened your application since last time. Okay. Also a note here, confidence is not arrogance. I'm not telling you guys to be arrogant, right? Confidence is knowing that you put forth application documents and an interview performance that you feel like truly represented you and was genuine, and that you have given your best efforts, right? That is what makes a confident applicant. Regardless of the outcome, people can feel proud of the effort that they've put in if they've at least done those two things. Okay? So for this last match day in 2024, here are the stats of how that broke down. It was about 1,860 people applied. 55% of those were interviewed, and then 613 actually matched. So out of everybody that applied, that was 33% of applicants who matched, and 59% of the people who interviewed ended up matching. Okay. So that is actually improvement over the last couple of years. Before it was 33%, the year before it was 28%, and the year before that was 26%. So we actually do have an increasing match rate, and that's due to a couple of things. Some programs have increased the number of seats that they're offering or the size of their classes. We also have a couple of new programs coming on each year, and actually this year there's 4 new programs. So probably at least about 20 new seats there. And we also have a decrease in the number of people applying. The year before last, it was over 2,000. It was about 200 more people applied because we were in the middle of the pandemic. And people tend to try to go back to school in these kind of like recession times like we had the pandemic. Okay? So that's what we're looking at as far as what you're up against numbers wise. And so there's 2 main goals that you have, right? Your first goal, and this is as far as you need to think right now, is to submit a strong application that represents who you are as a 3D person, right? They can't get a sense of who you are as a person just looking at your GPA or even your CV, because those are just your accomplishments, but they don't tell us about how you think and what your values are and how you interact with other people. All of that information has to come from your statement of purpose. And so we really want to make sure that you're submitting a personal statement or statement of purpose, whatever the school wants, that's really represents who you think you are, right? And having a coach, whether it's us or another genetic counselor or someone else, can really help make sure that you are representing yourself accurately and in a way that you're proud of in your paper. Okay? Once you submit your documents, your new goal becomes be authentic in interviews. Okay. That is hard. And so, we'll talk about that a little bit too, but the main takeaway is practice on that. Okay. So it's our job to help you reach those two goals. Okay. And does it work? Does GC prep coaching work? It absolutely does. Last year, 89% of the people who worked with us in the fall ended up getting an interview. Compare that to 55%. And then 75% of people matched. Compare that to 33%. So we more than doubled people's chances of matching with a program. And one of the things that we saw is the earlier that people started getting help with their application, the sooner they started thinking like a genetic counselor, the better they did in interviews and the more likely they were to match, because they've had just longer to develop their critical thinking skills and developing insight. Okay. So let's move into timeline. What should you be doing now? And then we'll talk about in the next few months. So we want you to make a little schedule for yourself, set some goals as far as when you're going to have a draft of your statement. If you know some schools that you're going to apply to, we want to make sure you mark those dates in your calendar. A lot of them are in the first half of December, like the 1st through the 15th. There are a lot of them in that range. We also want to make sure that you leave yourself time for rest and self-care. Right? This is not a go hard until you almost die and then crash and then try to recover situation. We want you to build in these times when you can take a break, not have to think about this, and then come back to it when you feel refreshed. Okay? Also, if you're still in school, if this is your last year of college, then you have plenty of other things going on, right? So it's even more important for you to make sure that you have time to rest while also meeting these goals and these timelines that you've set for yourself. Okay. If you have not already done it, please register for the match. You absolutely have to have a match number to be able to apply and certainly to be able to be considered for match day. So if you miss your chance to register for the match, like you don't get that number before December 11th, then you're not applying this year. Okay. So make sure you take care of that. There are a limited number of fee waivers for that for people who need them. And there's instructions on most schools' web pages and also the National Match Service webpage on how to apply for those vouchers. Okay. Want to make sure you're lining up your 3 letters of recommendation. So ask the people that you want to recommend you. Make sure they know you well enough to truly give specific information and that they can really recommend you. Okay, you don't want to ask someone and they're like, okay, but then their letter to the school ends up being, I actually did not have a great experience with this person, right? You don't want that. Okay, lukewarm letters of recommendation also don't really do you favors. So when you're checking in with people to see if they'll write you a letter of recommendation, make sure that they feel comfortable truly recommending you and give them an out if they don't, right? If they're not 100% on board on your team that way, then say thank you for your time and move on to someone else. Okay. You also want to be researching schools, okay? Figuring out where you'd want to go, what kind of things are important to you, why that particular program is appealing. And if you're uncertain about any prerequisites for a program, go ahead and email them, okay, to find out about that. Now, I want to show you guys just real briefly, GC Prep has a program map tool, and I just updated it today. So this is our website. It's here under program map, and it is completely interactive. So depending on what kind of criteria you have for your programs, you can put that in here. So let's say that you really want to be on one of the coasts, let's say, so you can mark these coasts here, right? And let's say that you want to have a kind of large class, so you want more than 11 people, you can set those. And let's say that you have a budget right? You want it to be below $80,000, let's say. Okay, so based on the criteria I've selected, there are 8 schools that meet all of those criteria. Okay, and so then you can go and research them in more detail, or you can click on one, like this is a brand new program, Southern California University of Health Sciences, and you can see some details like how long their program is, their class size, whether the rotations are all at this particular campus, or if they do rotations out at different systems, their application deadline. Look, no application fee for this program, so like free, might as well add it, right? We have some requirements on like if they require letters of recommendation or a statement of purpose, what their cost is. It's all here, and we have mined that data directly from the school's website. So definitely still go to that program's website to get all the details before you make a final decision to apply there. Like, don't just rely on this, but this is an excellent tool just to get you started on figuring out what kind of schools you're interested in, and maybe even point out some that you didn't think you'd be interested in, okay? Or didn't think of in the first place. If you're not sure how to consider some of these criteria, we also have a video on selecting schools, and it will go through 9 or 10 different criteria of schools can vary in this way as part of their program. Here's the kind of people who would be good for that. Here are people who are maybe not good with that particular style. And so watching that video on selecting schools can help you know that you're picking criteria that work well for you and are going to set you up to be successful. Okay. We also want to make sure that you consider why you want to go there. Programs are not as unique as they like to think they are, right? And so when you're talking about why you want to go to that school in your paper, usually it's the last paragraph, you're not trying to find like that one unique thing about the program that caught your eye. You're trying to explain, you know, I have these needs or interests. It really falls in line with these particular offerings, right? So it's what is good about that school for you and what you want. Okay? And of course, we want you to still build up your experiences on your CV. So again, GC Prep has those educational videos on all parts of the application process, on many different specialties in the field, so you can understand how people are using their degree and what they're doing during the day as a genetic counselor in cancer, prenatal or peds, or a laboratory genetic counselor, things like that. There's also 11 counselor interviews that are over an hour each. And we interviewed people of all different points of their career and many different specialties, doing many different things. And you can add those interviews to your CV as like observed interviews. And so that can beef up your CV. And of course, anything that you're adding, whether it's you're watching webinars from other places or labs, or you're listening to like the DNA Today podcasts or other sources of information, you want to be reflecting on why was that important? It doesn't, the important part is not that you attended, right? The important part is what you learned from it. And so take a minute to jot down how that experience was significant to you, or something that you learned, or something that you found interesting, because that kind of insight and critical thinking about what you were exposed to is valuable when you move on to interviews. We also want to make sure that this question, like, why do you want to be a genetic counselor? Like, to help people is not a sufficient answer, right? That's most people's answer, to help people, and that's fine, but it can't stop there. Like, why? How? Why would that mean something to you? Why is that important for you in your career, right? We want to be able to flesh out that answer. Why do you want to be a genetic counselor? Long before you head into your interviews, because you definitely will be asked that question. Okay? In the next couple of months, October and November, you're going to be attending open houses. You're going to be watching any pre-recorded webinars that have been made by your schools of interest. You want them to see your name on the list of people attending. Not that it should necessarily be this way, but humans are more attracted to things that are familiar. So if your name or face are familiar to them by the time they are seeing you in interviews or by the time they are reviewing your application because you've submitted it, a degree of familiarity is better than none. Okay? You also are going to be wanting to draft out your statement and responses to other writing prompts. At this point, we strongly recommend that you have your documents reviewed by someone. Again, we do that, but even if it's not with us, if you have another genetic counselor or someone else helping you apply, you want them to review it. You want them to give you their thoughts. We're looking for a coherent narrative on who you are. We want to highlight your most genetic counselory attributes. And we don't want to just say, I have this skill. We want to say, here's a description of an experience where I realized I need this skill and how I decided to deploy it, right? That proof of your skill and that proof of concept is far stronger than just saying, I know how to be an advocate, right? Prove it with your paper. Also a good time to do course correcting and get support. So whether that's small groups or boot camp or support groups, just connecting with other people in the same process and having these touch points along the way will help make sure that you are not getting too far off track and off the rails. Because remember, about 40% of applicants get weeded out after they submit their applications. 40% don't make it to interviews. So we want to make sure that you're in the 60% that does. So checking in, making sure that you're on the right track is the best way for you to be successful there. In December, you're going to check in with the people who are writing your letters of recommendation, make sure they remember. Some people forget. Do they have everything they need? Do they have clear deadlines? Do they know where to submit their letter? Things like that. You want to make sure that they have all that and make it so that they have to do as little work as possible. You want them to put all their effort into writing a glowing recommendation for you. You want to spoon feed them the rest of the information they need to actually get it to the school. Okay. Again, keep adding experiences to your CV. Even after your application has already been submitted, don't stop doing stuff. Okay. If for some reason you do not match, you want to be able to show consistent building on your CV for next year if you were to apply again. And then submit your documents, right? We try to help our people submit those before the holidays so that it's not hanging over their head when they're trying to spend time with their loved ones. But you do you. Just make sure you're budgeting around whatever holidays you celebrate, if any, so that you have some time not to think about it and you really have some downtime to rest and enjoy your time. Okay. In January, that's when we're going to start seeing interview invitations come in. This is staggered. Some schools will still be accepting applications while other people are sending out their interview invites. And some schools actually have a rolling interview invite. So if you submit your applications early, you might find out that you're invited for an interview in November. You might get that invitation and then still it's not planned until January or February. But a lot of schools just wait until their deadline has passed and then usually mid-January start sending out those invitations. In general, successful candidates ranked 6 to 7 choices. So it's not necessarily 6 to 7 interviews because some schools have multiple tracks that you can rank, but ideally successful applicants are applying to like 8 to 10 places, okay? And the reason for that is you want to get as many interviews as possible so that you have better chances of matching. But you don't need to do like 15. That's too many. That's too many schools, right? It's better to use those that time and money that you would spend applying to like 15 programs to enrich your CV. You're going to bed. Okay, I'm on a webinar. I will see you tomorrow. We already said goodnight. Bye. Okay, sorry about that. We also in January want you to be practicing your skills for interviewing a lot. You're not regurgitating your CV. You're not repeating your statement. This is not like a job interview where you're saying, I will be awesome at this task, right? We want to see your authentic reactions. We want to see how you respond under pressure. We want to see how you think through these difficult scenarios and talk about things that were difficult for you, right? That's how to be successful in interviews. And so again, we're recommending that you practice that a lot. Also, at this point, I usually recommend that people start distancing themselves from the chat rooms and discussion boards, like the prospective student. In the past, it was the Discord. I think it's a Reddit now. It's not that that is a bad resource. It's a good resource, but in January and February and March, it becomes an anxiety-laden fever pitch of tracking every single detail, and it's not healthy, in my opinion, right? So if you need something there, sometimes they have some resources, go in, grab it, and then get out, right? Try not to dwell in there because it's just going to increase your anxiety, and you have people asking questions that are being answered by other applicants, which is not bad, but neither of those two groups have been successful at applying. So how do you know you're getting the right answer, right? So just beware at that particular time of the application process. In February and April, February and to mid-March are really our interview heavy times, okay? You don't have to feel like you're competing with other applicants that are interviewing on the same day. You're not, okay? All of you theoretically could be accepted to the program. You're just trying to do your best, and they're comparing you not to the people who are there on that day, but all the people that they interview across multiple days. So you don't have to feel like standoffish to the other people who are interviewing that same day, okay? You need to rank your schools by the 8th of April. If you don't rank your schools by then, you're not matching, okay? And then there's a wait. And in this year, it's only 8 days, which is gonna feel like a long time. And then match day is on the 16th of April, okay? After that, matched applicants are gonna start preparing for school. Unmatched applicants can seek a few of the open seats. Sometimes the match algorithm does not fill all possible seats, and so there can be a couple left over that you can apply for, and it's the same application process. There were 3 last year, but there were none for the 2 or 3 years before that, okay? So it's not a guarantee, but a few people kind of scoot in that way. And if someone does not match, then you decide, like, what are we doing now? Are we gonna try to apply it again? Are we taking a gap year and then trying again? Are we moving on to a different goal, right? So that's what that will look like. So why should we consider coaching in general? Whether it's with GC Prep or not, why consider getting help? There are things that you know, like all your efforts in your undergrad and all the experiences that you've had and everything that's on your CV and your goals and desires for the future, you know that, right? And you know that there are things that you don't know. And so you try to fill those gaps with online research and counselor interviews and asking more questions, and you are putting your efforts towards filling in these things that you're aware that you don't know, okay? The problem is there are things that you don't know that you don't know. And those, you can't solve those by yourself because you're not aware of them. So you have to have someone else instructing you or teaching you that or helping you fill in those gaps because you don't know to look for them. And anyone applying, whether you're a first-time applicant or a re-applicant, if you're here doing this, then you haven't successfully completed this process before. And so for sure, there will be items in this category, and that's where coaching can help you make sure that you don't have any of those big holes. Okay. Also, just in general, the field of genetic counseling really attracts the anxious because we're people pleasers and we want to help you have a good experience and we want to make sure everything's accurate. And so then we take on that anxiety of doing everything well. So letting that anxiety go unchecked or unguided can totally derail your process. I'm not saying that having anxiety will be your undoing. It won't. We just want to make sure it's managed and that you have someone that you can check in with to give you realistic guideposts of being like, this is a normal amount of concern to feel. You are way over here. Let's rein it in. Okay? That can help guide you and just overall have a better experience in applications. Okay? So let's talk about what GC Prep offers. Again, there's no obligation to use any of these things, though we have created them because we feel that they're helpful, right? The program app we talked about, so that you can find programs where you will thrive. There are some additional webinars that we'll be doing. In October, we're going to have one that's more detailed about writing your statement of purpose, like how to do that, how to structure it, what to include. And then usually we do an interview prep one in mid-January, and then there will be one after match day to help you either prepare for school or to figure out what you're doing next. Okay. And then we have some support groups. So there's a first-time applicant support group. There's also a re-applicant support group. Those are facilitated by our coaches. So I highly recommend you utilize those resources so that you don't feel like you're alone in this process. And because our coaches facilitate that, there can be reliable answers. Like if everybody's wondering about the same thing, there can be a reliable, trusted answer provided instead of just, we all just don't know. So we'll commiserate in our uncertainty here. We can actually have a source of information, okay? We do, of course, offer other services that are more specific to you. These are kind of our intro level offerings. So we have educational videos. Again, we talked about those a little bit, but there's about 24 hours of content on the field of genetic counseling in general, like what people are getting paid, where are they working, what specialties, how to write your statement, pick schools, how to understand your crisis work. If you're an international applicant, what the hell's going on with visas? Like all of that is kind of in our educational videos. You can add some of that to your CV. And they're designed to get you about 70% of the information you need to know to be a successful applicant. And then the rest of the information is really going to be specific to you. So we can't put it in a video, right? Because it's for you in particular. Okay. And those videos are free for underrepresented applicants. So if you feel like you might fall into that group, see our financial aid tab. There's a demographic survey. You can get access there. Okay. There are also small groups. So it's up to 6 applicants and they meet with a coach, and that group is focused on one particular topic. So we have some on writing your CV and others on like writing your statement of purpose. And because there's multiple applicants, you're not getting like a full review of your document. But if you have specific questions or specific concerns, you can bring that up and we can look at a portion, right, of your paper, like a paragraph or two, and then other people can hear that feedback as well. You can take what's said to other people and apply it to your own paper. Okay. That is a great way to kind of like dip your toes in. It's super budget friendly, so you can see if this would be helpful to you or not. You're not sure if you want to do any coaching. Small groups are ideal for just kind of testing the waters there. Okay. And then we have like one-time coaching. So you have like one document review where we go over all your documents and meet with you one-on-one to talk about feedback. We do mock interviews like that as well later. You can also do those services with a program director or an assistant program director, and you can't get much more reliable feedback than that. So those touch points are really great for people who feel like I mostly want to do it on my own, but I just want to check in, right? These are all kind of check-in items. Okay? For people who are really like ride or die, it's got to be genetic counseling. That's the only way. I want to give it my all, really maximize my chances of matching. These are for you. Okay. We call it a limited series of document reviews when that person purchases a package of multiple document review sessions, for example. And so we review, we meet and go over feedback. The applicant goes and makes edits, sends it to us again. We review again, meet, edit, and we have this like feedback loop. And we've seen really excellent growth in people who do limited series. And in some cases, their paper goes from really forgettable to standout, right? That's our goal. And most people's feedback is by the time they're done with even a 3-session document review limited series, they really feel like their paper is representing them and they're happy with what they're putting forth, even if it still needs some tweaks, right? But just that comfort and confidence in what they're sending out is really invaluable to them. Okay? So you can develop a relationship with your coach. A limited series like that is discounted compared to the same number of one-time sessions. And this is probably, these limited series are probably our most popular service. Okay? There are some people who want like, I'm at stage 0 and I really need a community and a path and like everything just kind of laid out right there for me. That's application boot camp. It's 6 weeks. The group meets once a week to go over a certain topic like personal statement or like CV or value finding, confidence building, things like that. And so there's some instruction and also discussion with the group. And then they meet another time a week to, as a group, interview people in the field. So these are patients, genetic counselors, caregivers of patients with genetic disorders, and you can add all those things to your CV. They also get the educational videos and a one-on-one session as well, okay? Our last session of boot camp, they've been going over the summer, but our last session starts on the 24th of this month, and that'll probably be the last one. And so if that's something that you're interested in, then you can use this 10% off code, LASTCAMP24 in all caps, only for applicants in boot camp. Okay. And then there are people who want like really holistic coaching. Like I want the document review stuff, I want help with my CV, but I also need more guidance. I need a cheerleader. I need someone to help build my confidence. I need someone to help me like grow as a human during this whole process. And that's what we call long-term mentorship. So our coaches that do, that have the life coaching certification, Jessa and Jessica, both offer that long-term mentorship. And that can be as much or as little as the applicant likes. So it can really help people grow. Okay? So these services right here on this slide are the ones that are most effective in raising someone's chance of matching. And that's because we really get into detail on how to think like a genetic counselor, how they should be considering the experiences that they've had, how they might have done things differently in those experiences, what they did well, and really digging into the meat of what happened so they can understand their own feelings about it and the other people that were involved in that situation as well. Like, what was that experience like for them? Okay. So yeah, highly successful here. Last year, 90% of people who did boot camp matched. The majority of people who did limited series and long-term mentorship matched, right? So these are highly high yield services. Okay. If you want to get started with us, you can book online, right? If you're not sure where to start and you just want to talk about a plan that's specific to you, you can book a long-term mentorship orientation. They're 30 minutes. You meet with me. It's free, no obligation. And we just talk about where you're coming from, what your needs are, what might be best for you, which coach could be good for you, right? We can set you up with chatting with the coaches before you decide. So that's really like a no commitment meeting just to see if this is going to be right for you. But again, even if it's not through GC Prep, having contact with another genetic counselor who can help you with the application process is just strongly recommended so that you don't feel isolated when you're trying to do this. Okay. Okay, So we're almost done here, but let's just talk about some upcoming events. Again, boot camp starts on the 24th. On the 25th, could possibly be moved to the 23rd. We'll have a small group that's focused on writing your statement of purpose. That one is already half full. So if you wanted to jump on that, then don't wait because it's half full there. We have the first time applicant support group on the 7th of October, a small group or workshop on writing your CV on the 9th, the reapplicant support group on the 14th. That's also the second Monday of each month. The first time applicant support group is also monthly. We just probably will change when that is starting in November. That one's still TBD. Our next webinar on writing your statement is on the 16th of October. Again, we have another small group or workshop on your CV. And then finally on November 18th, there's a workshop for a small group on writing your statement of purpose, but it's premium. So Janice, the program director, is leading that one. So again, great opportunity there. Okay. So that's kind of the end of where we're at today. If you have questions, email me. This support@gcprepllc.com comes directly to me, and I answer those questions. If you have more detailed, more advanced questions, or you want to strategize, or you really just want to like start that coaching process, or you just feel like I just need to talk through it with someone right now, and then maybe in like a month or two, see where I'm at, then that's like an unstructured time. And we can use that 45 minutes for whatever you want, right? We'll post this webinar on our website and also on our YouTube channel. And there's a bunch of other webinars there as well, if you guys want to watch those, okay? So now we'll move towards our question answer. Let me just stop sharing so we can see. Okay. Did I stop sharing? I think I did.
Yep, you did.
All right, Janelle, do we have any questions in the chat or anything you want to bring to the group's attention that we can answer?
That's a great question. I feel like I was responding fast and furiously.
See that
Sorry
there's
for
so many questions.
the essays of responses that I gave back to some of you, but a lot of times these things are nuanced and you're looking for like a yes or no, but they're way more nuanced than that. Do you want to talk about being an applicant who is straight out of undergrad versus somebody who's taken some time off?
Yeah.
And some of your experience around that?
Yeah. Neither is bad, right? That's the main takeaway. It doesn't really matter which you are. What matters is how do you process the world around you, right? So sometimes that is easier for people who have been out of school for a while because they've just experienced more life and more shit, right? So they just have more perspective on those things. And so that can be beneficial. So if you are a few years out of school, or if this is a career change, that is not a problem at all. We want to see why have you decided to pursue genetic counseling? Why do you feel like that is the best fit for you? If it's like filling a hole that you feel like you have in your career, like what you want out of, your life's work or whatever, why genetic counseling? If you are coming straight out of undergrad, again, not a problem. We just want to see emotional maturity, right? We're not looking to stock the field of genetic counselors with a bunch of mean girls, right? Who haven't learned how to get along with other people. What we want is to see that you have weathered your experiences in your undergrad. You're able to describe some of the life things that happened to you for good or bad. You are able to have a deeper understanding of the world around you and appreciate other people's points of view. Okay, so this is not a time when we take a hard stand on my way is the only right way, right? That thought process is not a genetic counselor thought process, right? Genetic counselors think, here's my opinion. Here's what I have gained understanding of by looking at my experiences, learning about other people's experiences and points of view, what's happened in their life. I have an opinion, right? You're allowed to have an opinion, and what you think is right morally, legally, whatever, you're allowed to have that. But your priority as a genetic counselor is to make sure that the person you are trying to help gets to make decisions that work for them. And even if it is not in line with what you think is right and your values, that's irrelevant, right? So we need to make sure that whether you're coming many years out of undergrad to the field of genetic counseling, or if you're coming right out of undergrad, that you are able to hold this space where you understand that your point of view and opinions are not the only ones that are possible to have and not the only correct ones, right? They're opinions, not fact. Okay. Janelle, do you have anything to add to that?
I wrote a mini essay in the chat, but ditto to everything that you said. Yeah.
Okay. We had a question here. Is it okay to write that you're a returning applicant in the personal statement of a school you haven't applied to previously? Yeah, that's totally fine, right? That can actually sometimes be beneficial, right? Because you're saying essentially, I tried, it didn't work, and that really sucked, right? That doesn't feel good, even if you were not expecting to get in the first time. Like, not matching is not a fun experience to open that email. And it's pretty common for applicants to describe that as like devastation. That's a common word to use. So I would advise you to be more specific, right? You were devastated, maybe at not matching, but why, right? Or how did you take that potentially soul-crushing experience and turn it into a drive forward, right? Because if you're here, then you decided to try again. And that is relevant. The mental gymnastics you had to go through between not matching on match day at one point to having the courage and the drive and the determination to try again, that is valuable experience, right? We want to understand what happened in there. Okay, so writing that you're a reapplicant, not a bad thing at all. We just want to see how you used it as a springboard. Okay. Let's see. How long should the typical CV be? Yeah, it varies. Most people coming out of undergrad are going to have about 2 pages, right? If you've been out of undergrad or if you had a different career, it could be longer. Or if you were especially into research and like published a lot, maybe it's longer than that. It should be longer than 1 page. I would say 2 to 3 is average. Another question here, how should one include GC exposure to resources such as having read books, podcasts, webinars, etc. on the CV? Good question. So there's usually a genetic counseling exposure section. And then there are some subsections in there. So shadowing, informational interviews, and then usually there's other media exposure, like you could put that in there. And that's where you would include like podcasts. And you can just say like the DNA Today podcast. You don't have to call out specific episodes. You can stick in webinars, any books that you've read, include all of that. Even if you're like, well, I don't think they're going to care if I listen to an episode of a podcast. They do. They do. Not because of the content, but just documenting that stuff shows that you have been invested in this for a while, right? So if you have a date for a specific event, like a webinar you attended that a lab put on or something, like put the dates. If it's something like the DNA Today podcast or a book, you may not have a date for it. That's okay. Does research experience highly influence the application strength in any way? I agree with Janelle and Jessica. It depends on the program. Every school has their students do some degree of research, if very like minimally for their thesis, right? Everybody has to do some type of research project, right? Their thesis or their capstone or whatever. Some programs hit it harder than others. They might have a research rotation. They might really be focused on trying to get genetic counselors to do research. Like the Johns Hopkins program, for example, very well known to be super heavy into research. They're actually not accepting students this year for the next couple of years. Unfortunately, stuff's going down over there. They're separating from the NIH. Don't know all the details, but unfortunately, they're not accepting people this time. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Again, we can put them in the chat or you can just ask them by unmuting, whatever you want.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is like from way earlier in the slides. You mentioned how when we're talking about our letters of rec that it would be best to give them like an out so they can gracefully be like, I don't think I should write your letter of rec. How do you recommend going about that?
Just doing it up front when you ask someone, right? So you would explain, hi, Professor Bob, right? I'm applying for genetic counseling grad school, and I need some letters of recommendation. And I really appreciated how we work together or the interactions that we have. I was hoping that you would be willing to write me a letter of recommendation. Of course, only if you're comfortable, and certainly only if you feel like you can truly recommend me. Like, I don't want to put you in a tough spot. I need like a glowing recommendation essentially to help me stand out. So is this something you feel comfortable doing? Would you be okay doing that for me? Do you feel like you could truly recommend me? Okay. And just
Thank you.
starting up front, so we don't like ask them and then like when it's almost due, be like, hey, is it a good one?
Yeah.
That just doesn't give you very much time to find someone else to like write it if they were like, actually, I can't really recommend you.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And part of that is also just checking to make sure they feel like they know you well enough to write a letter of recommendation. Okay. And it can be tricky to find someone who does. Some schools require at least one to be from an academic source, but many of them don't necessarily. So they could be bosses at your work or your crisis line stuff, the person that was supervising you or other volunteer work, just people that are familiar with your work ethic and your general like decision-making capabilities. It's who you want to ask. Other questions? We have a hand up.
Sorry, there's somebody who did write something in the chat, and
Yeah.
I'll just say it out loud so that I don't have to write a whole thing. My first question is to you, did you speak to them? Was it like a chat conversation over instant message? Was it over on social media? Was it a text conversation? Or was it over the phone or over Zoom?
Hi, that was me. So, he reached out like after hearing that I wanted to be a genetic counselor, and he's like super involved in like, well, he used to be. He graduated in like the 70s, so he was like kind of foundational, and we've emailed a lot back and forth, and we have phone calls set up, but like he's answered a lot of my questions and also helped me like get involved in like shadowing and like talking to programs. So is that something I could include, or is
Yeah.
it like, should I stray away?
No, definitely include that, right? Because he's talked to you about the field. He's answered some of your questions, right?
Perfect, because I just like he like helps me and he's always like, "Oh, what are you doing now? Like what
Is it
process?"
Bob? Is it Bob Resta?
No, it's
No, someone else.
Joe McInerney,
I don't know that name. Do you know? You might know the name.
like the New York area.
Mhm. Mhm. Other questions?
I do have a question. So, is it appropriate to write down the name of your mentor if you have one?
Yep.
So, would that go under like the genetic counseling interview place? Kind of
Yeah.
like what the person before was saying. It's like the same situation, but she also functions as a mentor as well.
Yeah, so you can add them as like an informational interview and mentor. That's fine. In general, when you're putting your informational interviews, you want to list the counselor's name, their specialty, their institution, and the date that you talk to them. Okay. So if someone is also your mentor, then you want to put that down as well. And you could add like a bullet point as far as like the types of things that you talked about, right? So if with your mentor, you are debriefing experiences that you've had in your crisis work, or you're doing some case review, or you are exploring like psychosocial ethical dilemmas, then you can just briefly note that on your CV as well.
So, what if it's more like guiding you around the field as well as, providing psychosocial, but more like support for you specifically rather than debriefing cases.
Mhm. Again, you can add what you do there, or if you feel like it's too amorphous to put any type of like label on, then you can just call it like mentorship and just leave it at mentorship, right? Because most people in the field understand that mentoring has a lot of different ways it can look, right? A lot of different conversations there.
Hi. Can I go
Hi.
next?
Yeah, you can. I wasn't sure how to pronounce your name, if I'm being totally honest. Would you mind saying that for me? So I know because I've seen your name a couple times.
It's Kaidu.
Right, perfect. Thank you.
Thank
What's your
you.
question?
Thank you for this session. It's been pretty insightful. So I wanted to ask about again touching on like the reference letters. I'm applying to a few Canadian programs. And at least for I guess 3 or 4 programs that I've looked into, one of the references typically should be from a referee who can sort of reflect on your communication, interpersonal skills. And I can think of, I guess, the 2 crisis centers that I've volunteered. And I contacted one of the centers where I've volunteered most of my time for the past 2 years. And it wasn't sort of disclosed to the volunteers that they cannot provide personalized letters of reference to any of the volunteers. It's in their policies apparently.
Hmm.
Fortunately, I volunteer on the second line as well. The thing is that that's sort of a university-based crisis line, and there are less people typically contacting us either through text or call. And the person who's in charge of the crisis line also doesn't know the volunteers pretty well. So I had this other the first crisis line in mind, where I've assisted over I guess 400 texters, and they've told me that they cannot provide a reference letter. However, I do know other people that can reflect on my interpersonal skills. But again, when going back to their credentials, for example, they're master's or PhD students, then are not necessarily tied to a psychosocial role or they're not like psychosocial like workers, or typically people that you would like find in a crisis center. So I'm sort of unsure how to like approach and fulfill the requirements for that reference specifically. Now that referee
That
from
one
that
fell through. Yeah.
center sort of told me that they cannot do that for anyone.
That's rude.
of volunteers.
Rude of them. Well, I will also phone a friend here in a minute. So Jess and Janelle, get ready for that one. But so first, I would check how strong that policy is. Like if you wrote your own letter, are they willing to sign it off, right? And send it in. So essentially they're agreeing to what you've written. But basically it sounds like they have that policy because they just don't have the bandwidth to be writing everybody letters of recommendation. But if you wrote it and they think it's reasonable and agree with it, would they be willing to just be like, yes, and then send it off, right? So check that. If they're not willing to do that, then I think the people that you reported to in the past, like the other like PhDs or other master's students, they can still be valuable, right? You just might need to coach them as like, if you could comment on my interactions, like not just academically, like how well did I do on this project or whatever I was working together on, but how well did I communicate? Was I able to get, you know, my point across? Was I respectful of other people? And just give them some extra prompts that you think would be valuable to you, or the things you want them to touch on. Because even if it's not necessarily in a crisis setting, anyone who's worked with other people knows there are still plenty of crisis moments that come up, right? Someone is being dramatic, or someone is not behaving appropriately and it's causing discomfort for other people, right? So those don't necessarily have to be at a crisis line. You can have those in your normal like work experience. So you just might have to give those other like options that do know you well just some additional prompts to talk to, so that they're focusing their paper on the kind of psychosocial interactions that you want to have.
So they shouldn't like, sorry to interrupt you.
Wait,
No,
go ahead.
please continue.
I was just going to ask Jessica and Janelle what their thoughts are, but if you have a follow-up question or comment on that, go for it.
I was gonna say, like, does this like referee who would have to reflect on interpersonal skills, do they have to have like credentials or like experience in a psychosocial like role?
No, they can't be your mom, right? They can't be a family member or someone who's like personally and emotionally invested in your success, and that's the only way that they know you, right? Can't be a family member like that. But even someone who's like a master's student or a PhD student, like they have some degree of expertise, or they're gaining expertise in that field, and they can comment on whether you're a cool dude to work with or not, right? And that's the point.
I think, I was just having this conversation earlier with one of my mentees with like the title. Well, first and foremost, whatever the school is asking you, if they want you to have if it's like, you need to have a genetic counseling reference, you need to have somebody that's a master's degree reference, then by all means follow those guidelines, right? But the title doesn't necessarily matter as much as to what Michaela was speaking to, right? If they know you personally, if they are in a different field of study, that's okay. But if they're close enough to you, and you can guide them a little bit into how and what to highlight about your skill sets and strengths, and that is okay. But always follow their criteria that they have. And I actually also had a follow-up to that too. I was working with one of my mentees who had a very similar situation. And to Michaela's point, like, right, ask the question. It doesn't hurt to ask. What she ended up doing was they had protocol. They weren't allowed to write the letter of recommendation. HR was like the only one that could really write the letter, but they weren't going to do that. So she asked if her supervisor that she was still close with could write the letter, and then HR could just send it off and sign it for them. So similar to what Michaela said, like if there's an opportunity for the person that's close to you to write the letter, and or you write the letter and they will just sign off on it, that's a great way to kind of circumvent that hurdle too.
Thank you.
So I would be cautious about you writing the letter. I'm getting bristled by this because I was present when an applicant wrote a letter and it got back to the people who supposedly signed and they were like, actually, no, we don't agree. I wouldn't want to put anyone in that position, because then what it looks like to programs and what we were faced with was, why would somebody do that? Exactly. And that person ended up getting banned from the match. So I'm just bristling because of that experience. And I know what it's like as a program director to try and like navigate what exactly was going on. And the hairs get too fine. It's just too much to try and really like figure out what's going on. So I would actually caution against that. If you get a supervisor, yes. If there's somebody else who can do it, yes, to all those things. Definitely still ask if there's like anything else that can be done or anyone else who can do it, for sure. But sorry.
No, this is a good point. I was going to mention that as well, because that is like, you know, if I understand why, like, Janelle, you're having a problem with that, because in that applicant's case, right, they had written their own letter and they had sent it in as if they were the writer, when that writer was never involved, right? So that's just like straight up lying. And that's not allowed. Don't do that. Really, don't do that at all.
But like, you could potentially be putting yourself in a really gray area. So I'm certainly, you can do whatever you want.
You might just need to like talk to whoever would be submitting it, and if they would be comfortable.
Yeah.
And if you're comfortable, right? So you just don't want to ever feel like you're coercing someone or like trying to convince them to give you a recommendation that they can't. So do whatever you're most comfortable with.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to either, and I probably don't feel comfortable with that option. So I just wanted your opinions on like exploring, or what other options I should explore if like that crisis center doesn't.
Also have another question. So the programs that you're applying to, are they specifically requiring that you have someone from your volunteer experience write you a letter?
I think one or two of them don't specify that. They just on one of like the referees, like one of the 3 referees should be typically a person who can assess and reflect on my communication, like counseling slash like interpersonal like skills overall, but they don't specify whether it has to be from like a volunteering position or not. So that's why I was wondering if I could ask one of my coworkers that I've worked in the past, who I've had communications and like situations where they can assess my interpersonal like skills, like such as like mentoring someone, and like group discussions and like working in group setting and all that. So I'll probably explore that option instead. Thank you for your insights and your opinions on this. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. We had another question here in the chat. Saying one of the school's open houses they attend mentioned they prefer crisis counseling, where you can talk to the person in crisis as opposed to texting them. Do I have to find new crisis counseling experience? If you want to and you can, go for it. If you don't, it just says prefer. It doesn't mean that the text line will be rejected. I mean, most applicants are probably doing their crisis work through a text line. So if someone is using the text line, that's not inherently bad. right? If you're insecure about using the text line, and just general recommendation here is you want to be able to talk about having significant experiences, right, in your text support. So we want to be able to see, like, if you're describing a scenario where you were providing tech support to someone in your paper, which I would recommend, right? At least touch on your crisis work in your paper, regardless of what it was. If you don't, then like, did you learn anything from it? That's kind of like the perspective of programs, right? So touch on it somewhere. And if you're describing a situation, I want to hear about how did you approach it, right? Was it comfortable for you? Were you uncertain? Were you really panicked because they were suicidal and you were worried that if you didn't do it right, they were going to kill themselves and you were maybe going to be partly responsible for that? Like, that's a lot of emotional weight for someone who's trying to help somebody to hold. So I want, when I'm reading your paper, I want to feel what you were feeling in that moment. I want to see the situation as if I'm watching it from behind your eyeballs, right? Not like I'm watching a situation on TV play out, right? I want to think what you're thinking. I want to feel what you're feeling. And if you're able to describe your text situations like that, I don't think it really matters whether it's text or in person, as long as you're able to be insightful and connected with your own visceral reactions, what you were feeling from the other person, and how you navigated that uncertainty in those very sensitive conversations, especially when you can't see their face and you can't hear their tone, and they had a long pause between their last answer, like, what was happening? You know, is something bad happening? You know, all of those, that roller coaster of emotions that you can feel as you're trying to assist someone, that is insightful. That is the experience that genetic counselors are having when we're trying to talk to people and help them through their genetic testing journey. So the more you can comment on that type of interaction, the more valid your experience will be. And it's that type of insight that is making programs say, we prefer you talk to a real person rather than text, because sometimes people aren't able to consider how deeply they dived, right? Regardless of whether it's text or in person. But sometimes just the distance of text makes it harder for people to reflect on it and be insightful. If you're insightful, that's fine. That's what they're after.
Yeah. And just to contribute to that too, right? This is a great opportunity if you know that a program is very like, it's preferred that you have in-person counseling versus in like text. Like, be prepared to answer that type of question, like identify the nuances between texting versus having a like actually communicating with somebody, and identify those different changes and things of, like, for example, like body language. Like in person, you're able to identify that. So if you start thinking about those things too, of the differences between them and how you can kind of supplement other experiences that you have, in engaging with people and being able to read body language, or being able to like see a physical, like, you know, something that you would get from an in-person, it's good to reflect on those things too, of how, and maybe add to either something you include in a personal statement and or something that you talk to when you, and if you should be able to interview with these individuals, to kind of solidify your experience just a little bit more and strengthen it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Well, we are definitely over time. I apologize for that. But if anyone has any final questions, we can go ahead and take care of those, and then we'll wrap up for the night. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for coming. Again, feel free to email me if you have any questions. We can take care of those, but I appreciate your time and take care. Good luck.